The crystalline spires of the Galactic Institute pierced the violet sky of Centauri Prime, their surfaces reflecting the light of 3 setting suns. Inside the Grand Hall of Languages, Professor Xylitha's 8 compound eyes surveyed the assembled students with calculated intensity. His exoskeleton, iridescent with age and wisdom, shifted colors as he moved across the anti-gravity platform. "You represent the finest linguistic minds in the galaxy," his translated voice echoed through the chamber. "Yet I wonder if any of you truly understand what language is." The professor's mandibles clicked with subtle disapproval as he gestured toward the holographic displays surrounding them, each showing complex translation algorithms and neural mapping patterns. Among the diverse gathering of beings, Dr. Rowan Hayes sat quietly, his weathered hands folded in his lap. As the only human in the advanced xenolinguistics program, he stood out not just for his species, but for his age. At 45, he was decades older than most first-year students, his graying temples and laugh lines marking him as an anomaly among the youthful faces of other races. The Myrician twins, Vex and Nyx, floating in their containment spheres of liquid nitrogen, whispered to each other through quantum entanglement. Their crystalline forms sparkled with barely contained amusement as they regarded the human. Nearby, Oracle Nell, a being of pure energy contained within an ancient mechanical shell, calculated the statistical probability of a human succeeding in the program. The numbers weren't favorable. Professor Xylitha's voice cut through the murmurs. "Your challenge is this: decode and communicate with a species whose language has never been successfully translated. You have 1 orbital cycle." His announcement triggered a cascade of reactions. The Myrician twins' crystals vibrated with excitement, while Oracle Nell's shell emitted a low hum of computation. Rowan simply watched, his eyes tracking the subtle shifts in Professor Xylitha's color patterns. He'd spent years studying Earth's dying languages, living among indigenous tribes, learning not just their words but their songs, their silences, their ways of seeing the world. His application to the Institute had been unconventional: no quantum neural implants, no AI augmentations, just decades of field experience and a theory about the nature of language itself. As the other students rushed to access the Institute's vast databases, Rowan approached Professor Xylith. "May I ask about the species we're meant to communicate with?" His voice was quiet, measured, carrying the patience of someone who had learned that understanding often came through listening rather than speaking. The professor's color patterns shifted to deep indigo, surprise, perhaps, or curiosity. "The ethereals," he responded, mandibles clicking softly. "They exist partially in our dimension and partially in another. Their language." He paused, compound eyes focusing on Rowan, "has driven some of our finest minds to madness." Instead of fear, Rowan felt a familiar thrill, the same he'd experienced in the Amazon, learning from a shaman whose language was spoken only by 3 living people, or in Tibet, where monks communicated through subtle changes in breathing patterns. "Thank you, Professor," he said, noting how the indigo in Xylitha's exoskeleton swirled with flecks of gold when he mentioned the ethereals. In the following days, while other students immersed themselves in virtual simulations and quantum processing, Rowan spent hours in the Institute's biological archives. He studied recordings of ethereal appearances, not for their words, but for their movements, their interactions with space and matter. He noticed patterns, how reality seemed to ripple around them like water, how light bent in predictable ways when they communicated. The Myrician twins found his methods amusing. Primitive, Vex vibrated one day, their crystalline form resonating with derision. "You can't possibly hope to comprehend multidimensional communication through simple observation." Rowan smiled, remembering a deaf-blind community he'd worked with on Earth, who communicated through subtle variations in air pressure and vibration. "Sometimes," he replied, "the simplest methods reveal what technology obscures." As the days passed, Rowan began to see something in the ethereal recordings that others had missed. Their dimension shifting wasn't random, it followed patterns similar to tone languages on Earth, where meaning changed with pitch and rhythm. He spent hours moving his hands through the air, mimicking their spatial distortions, feeling how reality warped around them like notes in a cosmic song. Professor Xylith observed silently, his color patterns shifting between curiosity and something deeper, hope, perhaps, or recognition of something long forgotten in the age of technological translation. The other students, racing to build ever more complex translation matrices, barely noticed the human who danced with invisible partners, learning a language that existed between dimensions. But as the orbital cycle drew to a close, tension filled the halls of the Institute. The challenge's true purpose remained unclear, but Rowan had begun to understand that language wasn't just about words or even thoughts, it was about existence itself, about the way beings moved through reality and perceived their place in it. As he prepared for the final test, he couldn't help but wonder if that understanding would be enough to bridge the gap between dimensions, between ways of being that seemed fundamentally incompatible. What he didn't know was that Professor Xylith's challenge was more than an academic exercise, it was a desperate attempt to prevent a catastrophe that only the ethereals had foreseen, and that only they could help prevent. The future of multiple dimensions hung on the ability to establish true communication, and time was running out. The Institute's meditation chamber was designed to dampen all external stimuli, creating a void where students could focus on pure linguistic patterns. Yet as Rowan sat cross-legged in the darkness, he deliberately opened himself to every subtle sensation, the barely perceptible vibration of the station's power core, the rhythmic pulse of artificial gravity, even the quantum fluctuations that the ethereal seemed to dance through. Oracle Nell's mechanical shell hummed nearby, processing terabytes of data per second in an attempt to decode the complex dimensional shifts that characterized ethereal communication. Your method is inefficient, the energy being observed, their voice a carefully modulated series of tones. I have analyzed 47 million possible permutations of their spatial distortions. The pattern recognition algorithms alone. Have you ever heard music? Rowan interrupted softly, his eyes still closed. The question caught Oracle Nell off guard, causing their processing cycles to stutter momentarily. Music is a primitive form of pattern-based auditory stimulation, they responded. Its relevance to multidimensional communication is. Listen, Rowan said, raising his hand. In the darkness, he began to move his fingers through the air, creating subtle distortions in the chamber's carefully maintained void. The movements were based on his observations of ethereal interactions, but there was something more, a rhythm, a flow that seemed to resonate with the very fabric of spacetime. Unknown to both of them, Professor Xylith observed from his private chamber, his compound eyes detecting wavelengths of reality that most species couldn't perceive. The professor's exoskeleton shifted through shades of deep purple as he watched Rowan's movements create ripples in dimensions that shouldn't have been accessible to human perception, let alone manipulation. The Myrician twins, Vex and Nyx, had taken a different approach. Their crystalline forms had been modified with cutting-edge quantum processors, allowing them to simultaneously process information from multiple dimensional planes. We've achieved a breakthrough, Vex announced during the next class session, their crystal structure pulsing with pride. Our translation matrix can now detect and interpret 99.9% of all known dimensional frequencies. Indeed, Professor Xylith clicked, his color patterns neutral. Then perhaps you can explain why the ethereals have gathered in unprecedented numbers at the edge of known space. The announcement sent shockwaves through the class. The ethereals were normally solitary beings, their appearances rare and seemingly random. A gathering suggested something momentous, or catastrophic. Rowan felt a chill run down his spine. During his research in the archives, he'd noticed something about the historical recordings of ethereal appearances. They didn't just shift between dimensions randomly, they were trying to show something, to warn about something. Their very movement through reality was a message that traditional translation methods couldn't decode. Late that night, in the Institute's hollow observation dome, Rowan stood before the vast window that looked out into the star-filled void. He began to move, not trying to mimic the ethereals exactly, but rather feeling the way they flowed through spacetime. His movements created subtle distortions in the air, like ripples in an invisible pond. A soft chime indicated another presence. It was Naira, a quantum weaver from the Andromeda galaxy, her form a constantly shifting pattern of light and shadow. She had been watching him for days, intrigued by his unconventional approach. Unlike the others, she understood something about what he was trying to achieve. "They sing," she said, her voice a whisper of starlight. "Not with sound, but with reality itself." Rowan nodded, continuing his movement. "Every culture I've studied on Earth had music before they had written language. Some had complex musical traditions but never developed writing at all. Music isn't just sound, it's mathematics, physics, emotion, and story all woven together." Naira's form shimmered with interest. "And you believe the ethereals are singing across dimensions," Rowan completed. "Not just communicating information, but sharing the very rhythm of existence." He paused, watching as his movements caused slight distortions in the starlight streaming through the dome. "The question is, what's the song about?" The answer came sooner than expected. During the next training session, as the students presented their progress, alarms blared throughout the institute. The ethereal gathering had grown exponentially, their presence causing unprecedented disturbances in the fabric of reality. Professor Xylitha's exoskeleton turned a deep, troubled crimson. "The time has come for your final test," he announced, his clicking taking on an urgent tone. "The ethereals have requested direct communication. All previous attempts have failed. They refuse our technology, our traditional methods of translation." The Myrician twins' confidence faltered, their quantum processors struggling to cope with the complexity of the ethereal gathering. Oracle Nellis algorithms crashed repeatedly, unable to find patterns in the chaos of dimensional shifts. But Rowan stood calmly, his eyes closed, feeling the vibrations of reality around him. In the patterns of the ethereal's movements, he had begun to recognize something familiar, the same mathematical ratios that appeared in Earth's music, in the spacing of leaves on a plant, in the spiral of galaxies. "They're not just trying to talk to us," he said quietly, opening his eyes. "They're trying to teach us how to dance." Professor Xylitha's color patterns shifted to a hue none of the students had seen before. "Explain," he demanded, all 8 eyes focused intently on the human. "Every movement they make, every dimensional shift, it's part of a larger pattern. We've been trying to translate their language word by word, but it's more like a symphony. Each note means nothing alone, but together." Rowan's voice trailed off as he realized the full implications of what he'd discovered. The professor's mandibles clicked rapidly. "Continue," he urged, his exoskeleton now pulsing with colors that suggested both excitement and fear. "They're showing us how reality itself moves," Rowan said, his voice barely a whisper. "And they're trying to warn us that the song is about to change." The Institute's Grand Observatory had been transformed into an emergency command center. Holographic displays showed the growing congregation of ethereals, their dimensional rifts creating patterns that resembled auroras across the void of space. The Galactic Council's representatives had arrived, their presence adding to the tension that filled the chamber. Rowan stood before the main viewing screen, his hands moving slowly through the air as he tracked the ethereal's movements. Behind him, Oracle Nellis' mechanical shell processed data at unprecedented rates, trying to find meaning in the chaos. The Myrician twins, Vex and Nyx, had linked their quantum processors directly to the Institute's mainframe, their crystalline forms glowing with the strain of computation. "Impossible," Vex vibrated, their usually perfect crystalline structure showing signs of stress. "The dimensional distortions are increasing exponentially. Our models can't keep up." Naira, the quantum weaver, moved closer to Rowan, her form shifting like starlight through water. "The patterns are changing," she observed, her voice carrying notes of concern. "They're becoming more urgent." Professor Xylitha's exoskeleton had taken on a deep, pulsing crimson as he addressed the Galactic Council representatives. "We are witnessing something unprecedented," he clicked, his mandibles moving in agitated patterns. "The ethereals have never gathered in such numbers, never demonstrated such coordinated behavior. The Council's senior observer, a being of pure thought encased in an ancient mechanical frame, stepped forward. The stability of multiple dimensions is at risk, they stated, their voice a symphony of harmonics. If we cannot establish communication soon, we may have to take preventive measures. Rowan's hands froze mid-motion. Preventive measures, he asked, turning to face the observer. You mean weapons? The chamber fell silent. The observer's frame hummed with carefully modulated frequencies. The safety of our reality must be preserved, Dr. Hayes. If we cannot understand their intentions, then we're not listening properly, Rowan interrupted, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had spent decades learning to hear what others missed. He turned back to the display, studying the intricate dance of dimensional rifts. Look at the pattern they're creating. It's not random, and it's not just communication. It's demonstration. He began to move again, his gestures matching the flow of dimensional distortions on the screen. Naira's form rippled in response, her quantum nature allowing her to sense the subtle changes in reality that Rowan was tracking. The mathematics, she whispered, her light patterns shifting rapidly. It's similar to the fundamental frequencies of our universe, Rowan completed. The same patterns we see in the spin of galaxies, in the orbital resonance of binary stars, in the quantum dance of particles. He turned to Professor Xylith. They're not just trying to talk to us about reality. They're showing us how reality works. The professor's color patterns shifted to deep indigo as understanding began to dawn. The dimensional barriers, he clicked softly. They're not just moving through them. They're maintaining them, Rowan confirmed. The ethereals aren't just visitors from another dimension. They're the guardians of the boundaries between dimensions. Oracle Nell's processing stuttered momentarily. That would suggest that something is wrong with those boundaries, Rowan said. The song is changing because the structure of reality itself is under threat. The Myrisien twins' crystals vibrated with alarm. Our quantum sensors are detecting increasing instability in the dimensional barriers, Nix announced. The effect appears to be cascading. The senior observer's frame emitted a low, warning tone. If what you suggest is true, Dr. Hayes, then we face a crisis beyond our previous calculations. But how can we be certain? How can we trust the interpretation of? They paused, mechanical frame whirring, traditional methods. Rowan smiled slightly, remembering countless nights spent with dying languages on Earth, learning that understanding often came through surrender rather than force. Because sometimes the oldest methods are the best ones. We've been trying to translate their language using technology, but what if language itself isn't what we think it is? He stepped to the center of the chamber, his movements becoming more deliberate. Every culture I've studied had stories about the beginning of the universe, about the song that brought reality into being. We dismissed them as primitive mythology, but what if they were trying to tell us something fundamental about the nature of existence? As if in response to his words, the ethereal gathering began to move in new patterns. The dimensional rifts pulsed with increasing intensity, creating harmonics that resonated through multiple planes of reality. Professor Xylith's exoskeleton shifted through a rainbow of colors as his compound eyes tracked the display. They're responding to you, he clicked urgently. The patterns, they're synchronizing with your movements. Naira's form brightened suddenly. Not just synchronizing, she said, her voice filled with wonder. They're teaching. Each pattern is building on the last, showing us something about the structure of. She never finished her sentence. At that moment, reality itself seemed to shudder. The holographic displays flickered and died, then came back online showing something that should have been impossible, a cascade of failing dimensional barriers, spreading across the galaxy like cracks in a cosmic egg. The senior observer's frame emitted a high-pitched whine of alarm. We're detecting critical failures in the quantum substrate of spacetime. If the pattern continues, then everything ends, Rowan finished quietly. He looked at the display, at the dance of the ethereals that now seemed less like communication and more like desperate preservation. Unless we learn to sing their song. Time itself seemed to stutter as reality buckled under the strain of failing dimensional barriers. In the Institute's command center, emergency systems blared warnings in a dozen different languages while the assembled beings watched in horror as the fabric of existence began to unravel. The Myra-Sien twins' crystalline forms had developed stress fractures from the computational overload. The quantum cascade is accelerating, Vex announced, their usually melodic vibrations harsh with strain. Traditional physics is breaking down. Oracle Nell's mechanical shell sparked and whirred as they processed the incoming data. Probability matrices are collapsing. I can no longer predict outcomes with any degree of certainty. But Rowan stood motionless in the center of the chamber, his eyes closed, feeling the rhythms of disaster rippling through spacetime. The ethereal's movements had become more urgent, their dimensional shifts creating patterns that resonated with the fundamental frequencies of the universe itself. Professor Xylitha's exoskeleton had turned a deep, midnight blue, a color of ultimate crisis. The Council's weapons platforms are powering up, he clicked softly. They intend to seal off this sector of spacetime, sacrificing it to save the rest of reality. The senior observer's frame hummed with grim determination. We have no choice. The dimensional collapse must be contained. Wait, Rowan's voice cut through the chaos. His eyes opened, showing not fear but understanding. I know what they want us to do. Naira moved closer, her quantum form rippling with anticipation. The song. Not just the song, Rowan said. The harmony. The ethereals aren't just maintaining the barriers between dimensions, they're conducting a symphony of reality itself. But they're losing control because the universe has grown too complex, too vast for them alone. He turned to face the assembled beings. They need us to join the song. All of us. Each species perceives reality differently, exists in slightly different dimensional frequencies. Together, we create a harmony they can work with. The senior observer's frame creaked as they processed this. You suggest we attempt to harmonize with multiple dimensions? Impossible. The computational requirements alone. Stop thinking like a machine, Rowan said firmly. This isn't about computation. It's about resonance. About finding your place in the greater pattern. He looked at each being in turn. The Meraxian's crystalline harmonics, Oracle Nell's quantum processing, Naira's light weaving, the professor's chromatic perception, we each carry a different note in the universal symphony. Understanding dawned in Professor Xylitha's compound eyes, his color patterns shifting to a new hue, one that seemed to exist somewhere between hope and revelation. The challenge, he clicked softly. This was always its true purpose. Not to translate their language. But to learn to speak it ourselves, Rowan completed. He began to move, his gestures flowing like water, creating subtle distortions in reality. Follow the pattern. Don't try to understand it, feel it. Naira was the first to join, her quantum form pulsing in harmony with Rowan's movements. The Myra-Sien twins followed, their crystalline structures vibrating at frequencies that matched the dimensional rifts. One by one, the beings in the chamber began to move, each in their own way, adding their unique resonance to the growing harmony. Professor Xylitha's exoskeleton blazed with colors that had no names as he too joined the dance. Even Oracle Nell, understanding at last that some things transcended pure logic, allowed their mechanical shell to resonate with the universal frequencies. The ethereals responded. Their movements shifted, becoming more coordinated, more purposeful. The dimensional rifts began to stabilize, the quantum cascade slowing as reality itself responded to the combined harmonics of multiple species working in concert. The senior observer watched in amazement as their sensors registered the impossible. The dimensional barriers were healing, strengthened not by technology or weapons, but by the synchronized resonance of diverse consciousnesses moving in harmony. This changes everything, they hummed softly. Our understanding of reality, of consciousness itself. It always was, Rowan said, still moving, still part of the greater dance. We just forgot how to listen. Every ancient culture knew it, reality isn't something that happens to us. It's something we participate in, something we help create through our very existence. Hours passed as the combined consciousness of multiple species worked with the ethereals to stabilize the dimensional barriers. When it was finally done, when reality had settled into a new and stronger pattern, Professor Xylith approached Rowan. You never used a translator, the professor clicked, his colors shifting with curiosity. You never built a device or wrote an algorithm. How did you know? Rowan smiled, thinking of all the nights he'd spent learning dying languages on Earth, of the wisdom hidden in what others had dismissed as primitive. Because sometimes the most advanced technology is the oldest one we have, our ability to listen, to learn, to join the dance. The professor's mandibles clicked in what might have been laughter. Perhaps, he said, his colors shifting to shades of dawn, it is we who should be studying at your feet. As the Institute began to return to normal operations, as beings from across the galaxy began to process what had happened, Rowan stood at the observation window, watching the ethereals continue their eternal dance through the dimensions. They moved differently now, their patterns incorporating elements of the harmony they had created together. We haven't just learned their language, he murmured to himself. We've become part of it. And in the vast spaces between dimensions, reality itself sang a new song, one of harmony, of unity, of different beings learning to move together in the great dance of existence. The barriers between dimensions were stronger now, maintained not just by the ethereals, but by the conscious participation of all sentient beings in the symphony of the cosmos. It wasn't the end of the challenge, it was just the beginning of a new understanding, a new way of being. And somewhere in the depths of space, the ethereals danced on, no longer alone in their sacred task of maintaining the music of reality itself.